Every year, quietly and without ceremony, thousands of tons of high-grade metal are harvested from the dead. This isn't the stuff of Gothic novels or treasure hunts. It is a modern, industrial reality. We are talking about aerospace-grade titanium, surgical cobalt-chrome, and precious metals like gold and palladium, all reclaimed from the ashes of ordinary people. It's a supply chain that begins at the most personal of endings and feeds back into the global economy in ways almost no one ever thinks to ask about. It is perhaps the last great hidden recycling program on Earth. Before we start, a quick roll call. Write in the comments which part of this planet you're watching from, and then just listen and enjoy. This reality brings us to a quiet, almost invisible question. When a life ends, and the body is returned to its elemental state through fire, what becomes of the things we carried inside us, the parts that are not bone or dust? Where do the gold teeth, the titanium hips, the stainless steel pins from a long-forgotten accident actually go? And who, if anyone, benefits from this final, silent transaction? By the end of our time together, you will understand this entire unseen journey, from a deeply personal artifact to an industrial commodity, and you will see how the very materials that repaired our bodies in life are woven back into the fabric of the living world in the most astonishing ways. Let's begin by shifting our perspective. When we think of what is left behind, our minds naturally drift to the intangible. Memories, stories, the love we shared, the lessons we taught. We consider the genetic legacy in our children, or the financial inheritance we might leave. These are the narratives we are comfortable with. They are stories of continuity, of spirit, of a life's meaning transcending its physical form. But there is another legacy, one that is intensely physical, profoundly practical, and almost entirely unspoken. It is the legacy of the modern, medically supported body. It's a story written not in ink, but in metal alloys and surgical-grade polymers. Think of the body as a living archive. A knee replacement tells a story of a ski trip gone wrong and the subsequent decades of pain-free walking. A dental crown speaks of a sweet tooth in youth and the meticulous care of a dentist. A steel plate in a forearm is a permanent reminder of a fall from a bicycle, a testament to the body's incredible ability to heal around a foreign object, to make it part of itself. These objects are not mere accessories. They are integrated components of a life's journey. They are the hardware that ran the software of a person's final decades. They bore witness to their host's every step, every meal, every breath. And yet, at the end of life, our focus on material legacy abruptly stops at the skin. We carefully deliberate over who should receive a wedding ring, a favorite watch, or a set of porcelain dishes. These external objects are imbued with immense sentimental value. We hold them, and we feel a connection to the person who is gone. But the hip joint that allowed a grandmother to dance at her granddaughter's wedding, the pacemaker that gifted a father an extra 10 years of life. These objects, arguably more vital and more intimately connected to the person's lived experience, vanish from our consideration entirely. We assume they simply disappear, or that they are buried with the ashes, a final, inert part of the whole. The truth is far more complex and far more fascinating. These materials are designed to be incredibly durable, to withstand the immense pressures and corrosive environment of the human body for decades. They are, by their very nature, built to last. And this inherent durability means they easily survive the intense heat of the cremation process, emerging from the fire scarred and discolored, but structurally intact. They are the last physical remnants, the most enduring parts of a person's time on Earth, outlasting even their bones. This simple fact of material science has given rise to an entire global industry, one that operates with quiet efficiency in the background of our most profound rituals of grief and remembrance. It is an industry of collection, sorting, refining, and redistribution. It connects the local crematorium in a small town to an international metals broker, and ultimately to an airplane manufacturer or a car company. Most families are completely unaware that this process even exists. The forms they sign, in a haze of grief, often contain a single, vaguely worded clause about the disposition of non-organic materials. It's a sterile phrase for a deeply personal reality. The idea that a part of a loved one, a part they paid for, that was integrated into their very being, could become a raw material for a new product can feel jarring. It straddles a strange line between the sacred and the profane, between honoring a memory and recycling a resource. This journey we are about to take is not a morbid one. It is a story of transformation, a story about how modern life, with its medical marvels, has created a new, unintentional form of continuity. It reveals a hidden cycle where the very things that help sustain an individual life are returned to the collective, contributing in unseen ways to the structures and technologies that support us all. It's a testament to our ingenuity, but it also raises profound questions about ownership, consent, and the true meaning of value when a life has come to its end. The story begins in the heat of the modern pyre, where fire separates the organic from the inorganic and sets these resilient little objects on their final, unexpected journey back into the world. To understand the journey of these hidden metals, we must first step respectfully into the quiet, functional space of a modern crematorium. This is not a place of ancient pyres open to the sky, but a highly controlled, technologically advanced environment. The heart of this space is the cremation chamber itself, a machine known technically as a retort. Imagine a large, rectangular chamber, lined with industrial-strength, heat-resistant bricks, similar to those in a pottery kiln. It is built for one purpose: to contain and manage immense heat with precision and safety. The process begins not with fire in the way we might picture it, but with superheated air. Using natural gas or propane, the chamber is preheated to a temperature that is difficult to truly comprehend. We are talking about somewhere between 1400 and 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 800 to 1000 degrees Celsius. For perspective, this is significantly hotter than the maximum temperature of a domestic kitchen oven, and it's a heat at which glass slumps and melts, and aluminum turns to liquid instantly. Inside this chamber, the transformation is driven by heat and airflow, not by direct flame consuming the casket or the body. The intense temperature ignites the container, and then the body's own organic materials, composed mostly of water, carbon, and other combustible elements, are reduced to their most basic components. Through a process of controlled combustion, all organic matter is vaporized or consumed, becoming gases and fine particulate matter that are carefully filtered and processed to ensure no smoke or odor is released into the environment. This is a key aspect of modern cremation. It is an enclosed, clean, and highly regulated process. After a period of 2 to 3 hours, what remains is no longer a human form. It is a collection of calcified bone fragments, now made brittle and porous by the extreme heat. And mixed in among them are any non-organic materials that were part of the person's life story, the metal objects that their very chemistry made them impervious to the heat. Here, we must address a common and deeply ingrained misconception. We use the word ashes to describe what is returned to a family, and this word conjures an image of fine, soft, gray dust, like the remnants of a wood fire. But this is not accurate. What is initially removed from the cooling chamber is a collection of bone fragments, some larger, some smaller, but recognizably skeletal in origin. Their color is a whitish gray, and their texture is chalky. To create the uniform consistency that families expect and that can be placed in an urn or scattered, a second mechanical process is required. This is where the separation of organic and inorganic truly begins. The cooled bone fragments are carefully inspected. Any large, obvious metal objects, like the ball and stem of a hip replacement, might be removed by hand at this stage. Then, the fragments are placed into a machine called a cremulator. Think of the cremulator as a powerful, specialized blender or processor designed for a single, unique task. Its purpose is to reduce the porous bone fragments into a fine, sand-like powder. This is done through pulverization, often using a rotating blade or heavy ball bearings inside a secure drum. The process is loud, mechanical, and brief. The brittle, calcified bone easily breaks down under the force, becoming the familiar ashes or cremated remains. But the metal objects, the titanium screws, the steel plates, the gold crowns, are a different story. They are incredibly strong and dense. The cremulator's blades or weights simply spin and clatter against them, unable to break them down. When the processing is complete and the fine powder of the bone is emptied from the machine, these metal artifacts are left behind, now separated and distinct. A powerful magnet, often passed over the bone fragments before and after processing, will also pull out any ferrous metals, those containing iron, like older stainless steel surgical pins. What is left is a small, quiet pile of metallic history. This moment of mechanical separation is the crucial first step in the hidden supply chain we are exploring. It is an unintentional consequence of a process designed for an entirely different purpose. The cremulator was invented to make the remains more manageable and aesthetically consistent for grieving families. Yet, in doing so, it also created a simple and effective method for isolating the valuable, non-biodegradable materials that are a part of so many modern bodies. The crematorium operator is left with two distinct collections: the fine, pale powder of the processed bone, which is placed in a carefully labeled container for the family, and a separate, small collection of metal. This secondary collection is a jumble of twisted wire, small plates, melted blobs of gold, and perhaps the unmistakable shape of a joint replacement. These objects have endured the fire and the processor. They have outlasted the body they once supported. And now, sitting in a simple tray on a workbench, they are at the very beginning of their next journey, one that will take them far from this quiet room and back into the hum of industry. Let's look closer at that small collection of objects left behind in the cremulator, the things that fire could not erase. It is a quiet but remarkable catalog of modern medicine and personal history. The most common and most impressive are the major orthopedic implants. A hip replacement, for instance, often made of titanium or a cobalt-chrome alloy, will emerge from the 1800-degree heat almost entirely unscathed, perhaps darkened by oxidation, but structurally perfect. These materials have melting points well over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, so the heat of the retort is simply not enough to compromise them. We also find smaller pieces of surgical hardware, stainless steel plates, screws, and pins used to mend broken bones. Their shapes are functional, clinical, and yet they speak of profound moments of trauma and healing. Then there is the dental work. Gold has a lower melting point, around 1900 degrees, so it often doesn't survive as a recognizable crown or filling. Instead, it melts and fuses with other materials, creating small, heavy, and misshapen nuggets that are nonetheless rich with precious metal. These are the most common survivors, the durable hardware of a life lived in the modern age. Each of these objects is a chapter in a person's life, a silent testament to a journey of repair and endurance. Think of it this way. If an archaeologist 1,000 years from now were to find this small pile of metal, they could reconstruct a surprisingly detailed story. A cobalt-chrome knee joint tells of a person who, late in life, was given back their mobility, the freedom to walk in a garden or play with their grandchildren. A tiny titanium screw might be the last remnant of a complex spinal surgery that alleviated years of chronic pain. The small, fused bead of gold speaks of dental care, of meals enjoyed, of conversations had. Taken together, this collection forms a unique biographical hardware, a map of the body's vulnerabilities and the remarkable technologies we have created to overcome them. These are not just inert pieces of metal. They were, for a time, integral parts of a living, breathing human being. They carried a person through their final years, supported their weight, and enabled their daily existence. They are the last artifacts of a person's physical struggle and resilience. There is, however, one category of object that must never, under any circumstances, enter the cremation chamber. This is the pacemaker. Alongside it are similar devices like implantable cardioverter defibrillators or internal pain pumps, anything that contains a battery and a sealed electronic housing. The reason is a simple matter of physics and safety. These devices contain a lithium-ion battery. When exposed to the extreme temperatures of the retort, the battery can, and often will, explode. While it is not a massive, destructive blast, it is more than powerful enough to cause significant damage to the delicate ceramic and brick lining of the multi-$100,000 cremation chamber. The small explosion can crack the refractory lining, creating a serious safety hazard and requiring expensive, time-consuming repairs. For this reason, every crematorium has an ironclad rule. Pacemakers and similar battery-powered devices must be removed before the cremation process begins. This responsibility falls to the funeral director or the embalmer. During their initial conversation with the family, one of the standard, gentle questions they must ask is, "Did your loved one have a pacemaker?" Most families know and will say so immediately. In cases of uncertainty, the funeral professional is trained to check for the telltale scar and the small, hard lump under the skin of the upper chest or abdomen where the device is implanted. The process of removal, known as explantation, is straightforward and is done with the utmost respect for the deceased. A small, simple incision is made over the device, which is then carefully lifted out. The wires, or leads, that connect it to the heart are snipped, and the device is removed. The incision is then closed, leaving almost no visible sign of the procedure. It is a necessary, practical step, a quiet negotiation between the traditions of remembrance and the technological realities of the modern, augmented body. This single, critical exception, the pre-cremation removal of pacemakers, creates a separate stream of medical hardware that follows a different path from the metals that endure the fire. We now have two distinct categories of enduring objects: those that are harvested from the ashes and those that are carefully removed beforehand. Both tell a story, and both are at the beginning of a journey that is hidden from almost everyone. Once the cremulator has done its work, reducing the bone fragments to a uniform powder and leaving the metal artifacts behind, we arrive at the moment of separation. This is a hands-on, tactile process that bridges the gap between the sacred act of cremation and the industrial world of recycling. It's a task performed by the crematorium operator, a role that demands a unique blend of technical proficiency, emotional resilience, and profound respect. After the cremulator is emptied, the collected metals sit in a stainless steel tray. The first pass is often with a powerful, handheld magnet. The operator sweeps the magnet just above the collection, and with a series of satisfying clicks, all the ferrous metals, anything containing iron, leap up to attach themselves. This includes stainless steel screws, pins from older surgeries, and sometimes even the steel wire mesh from certain types of casket handles or joints that have survived the heat. These are collected and dropped into a designated container, often a simple bucket or bin. What remains in the tray is a jumble of non-ferrous metals and precious metals. This is where manual sorting comes in. The operator, often wearing gloves, will sift through the pile. The larger, more obvious pieces are easy to identify. A titanium hip implant, with its characteristic ball and stem shape, is unmistakable. A cobalt-chrome knee joint has a complex engineered appearance. These are set aside. Then the operator looks for the smaller, less distinct items. This is where experience and a trained eye become crucial. They are looking for the small, melted beads of dental gold, which are surprisingly heavy for their size. They might find platinum from certain surgical pins or palladium from dental alloys. These precious metals are separated into their own small container. The remaining material, the high-value titanium and cobalt-chrome, is placed with the larger orthopedic implants. Within a few minutes, a single, commingled pile of post-cremation metal has been expertly sorted into three distinct categories: low-value ferrous steel, high-value non-ferrous medical alloys, and highly valuable precious metals. Now, let's pause and consider the person performing this task. The crematorium worker stands at a unique intersection of human experience. On any given day, they are a custodian of grief, a technician operating sophisticated machinery, and, in this moment, a recycler of deeply personal artifacts. There is an emotional and psychological weight to this work that is difficult to overstate. Handling a hip joint is not like handling an aluminum can. This object was once inside someone. It was the pivot point for a person's mobility, a silent partner in their daily life. The operator is acutely aware of this. Most people who choose this profession do so out of a deep sense of service and a desire to provide care for families during their most difficult moments. They are not detached or unfeeling, yet they must also maintain a level of professional composure to perform their duties effectively. This sorting process is a microcosm of that balance. It is a moment of profound intimacy conducted in private. The operator is the last person to handle these final physical traces of a life. There can be a sense of quiet reverence in the act. They might recognize the sheer ingenuity of a particular implant, marveling at the technology that gave someone a better quality of life. They might feel a sense of connection, a fleeting thought about the person whose journey ended here. But the process is also methodical and routine. It is part of the job, a necessary step to clear the equipment and prepare for the next cremation. Many operators speak of developing a kind of respectful detachment. They see the objects not as macabre, but as the final durable remnants of a life well lived, a body well cared for. They see the value in ensuring these high-grade materials don't end up in a landfill, but are instead put back to good use. It's a form of final stewardship, ensuring nothing is wasted. This initial sorting is the critical first node in the entire unseen supply chain. The three bins, ferrous, non-ferrous, and precious, represent three distinct pathways, three different economic and logistical journeys. The simple steel will likely be sold to a local scrap metal dealer for a modest sum. But the other two bins hold a far greater potential value, both economically and materially. The collection of titanium and cobalt-chrome is the feedstock for a specialized, high-tech recycling industry. The small container of gold and other precious metals is destined for a refinery, where its true value will be unlocked. The operator closes the lids on the bins. For now, the journey of these metals pauses. They will be stored in a quiet, out-of-the-way corner of the crematorium, accumulating over weeks or months, waiting for the next step in their transformation from personal artifact to industrial commodity. It is in this quiet accumulation, across hundreds of crematoriums just like this one, that the scale of this hidden river of material begins to build. We've established why pacemakers and similar battery-powered devices must be removed before cremation, the risk of explosion. But this necessary safety protocol raises a new and equally complex question. What happens to these devices once they are removed? This creates a distinct side stream in the world of post-mortem materials, one governed by different rules, different ethical considerations, and a surprising range of potential outcomes. After the explantation procedure, the funeral director is left with a small, sophisticated piece of medical technology. It's a device that can cost tens of thousands of dollars when new and may still have years of battery life remaining. Simply throwing it in the trash is not an option. These devices contain lithium batteries and electronic components with potentially hazardous materials, classifying them as biomedical waste. They require special disposal. For many years, the standard and most common practice was straightforward. The removed pacemakers were collected and sent to a specialized medical waste disposal facility. There, they would typically be incinerated at high temperatures in a controlled environment designed to handle such materials, or they would be sterilized and then sent to a secure landfill. This remains a common pathway. The primary concern is safety and sanitation. The device has been inside a human body, and therefore it is treated as a potential biohazard, even though the risk of disease transmission from a sealed unit is infinitesimally small. The funeral home or crematorium often contracts with a biomedical waste company, and the pacemakers are collected periodically along with other materials. In this scenario, the story of the device ends here. Its potential is destroyed, its components are not recovered, and its value is reduced to zero. It is simply and safely disposed of. However, in recent years, a more nuanced and fascinating set of possibilities has emerged, driven by both charitable and environmental concerns. A growing number of organizations around the world have begun to see these discarded devices not as waste, but as a potential lifeline. Consider the situation in many low and middle-income countries. A brand new pacemaker is prohibitively expensive for a vast majority of the population. People with treatable heart rhythm disorders often go without, leading to a severely diminished quality of life or premature death. Yet, at the same time, in wealthier nations, thousands of perfectly functional pacemakers with years of battery life left are being removed from the deceased and destroyed. This stark disparity has led to the creation of pacemaker reuse and refurbishment programs. Organizations like Pace for Life in the United Kingdom or Heartbeat International in the United States work with funeral homes, crematoriums, and hospitals to collect these explanted devices. The process is meticulous. The collected pacemakers are shipped to a central facility where they undergo a rigorous testing and sterilization protocol. Technicians check the remaining battery life, test the electronic circuitry, and ensure the device is functioning perfectly. Any device with less than 70% of its battery life remaining is typically discarded. The units that pass are then cleaned, sterilized using a multi-step chemical process, and repackaged. They are then made available, often for free or at a very low cost, to physicians and hospitals in developing nations who have patients in desperate need. This is a remarkable example of a circular economy born from compassion. A device that provided a decade of extra life to a person in one country can go on to provide another 5 or 7 years of life to someone else, thousands of miles away. This practice, however, is not without its ethical and legal complexities. In the United States, for example, the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, classifies pacemakers as single-use devices. Officially, it is illegal to implant a used pacemaker into a new patient within the U.S. healthcare system. This is due to concerns about sterilization, device integrity, and the potential for malfunction. The companies that manufacture the devices also strongly oppose reuse, citing liability and patient safety. Therefore, these charitable refurbishment programs operate in a kind of ethical gray area, collecting devices in countries where reuse is prohibited and distributing them in countries where the desperate need for a functional device outweighs the perceived risks of using a refurbished one. The ethical debate is profound. Is it better for a patient to receive a carefully tested, used pacemaker than no pacemaker at all? Most physicians working in these under-resourced settings would argue a resounding yes. They see the tangible, life-saving benefits every day. But the official regulatory stance in the manufacturing countries remains one of caution. So, when a funeral director removes a pacemaker, they are standing at a crossroads of several possible paths. They can follow the simple, safe protocol of consigning it to a biomedical waste bin for destruction. Or, if they are affiliated with a refurbishment program, they can place it in a special collection envelope to be sent for evaluation. This choice transforms the device from a piece of medical waste into a potential gift of life. It's a quiet, often uncelebrated act of global citizenship, diverting a sophisticated piece of technology from the scrap heap and sending it on one final mission. The family of the deceased is rarely aware of this. The decision is typically left to the discretion of the funeral home, guided by their own policies and partnerships. The small, silent object that kept a heart beating now holds a new kind of potential, a second life of service that its original recipient could never have imagined. Let's return to the crematorium, to those 3 bins of sorted metal sitting in a storage room. While the pacemakers have embarked on their own unique journey, the metals harvested from the ashes begin a period of quiet waiting. A single cremation yields a relatively small amount of metal. A hip implant may weigh a pound or 2. The steel screws and dental gold only a few grams. It simply isn't practical or economical to deal with this material on a case-by-case basis. Instead, it accumulates. In a corner of the crematorium's utility area, you will find designated, clearly labeled containers. One for the ferrous metals, and one for the much more valuable non-ferrous alloys like titanium and cobalt-chrome. The precious metals are often kept in a smaller, more secure container, perhaps in a locked office. Day by day, week by week, the contents of these bins grow. With each cremation, a small handful of material is added to the collection. A knee joint from one person joins a hip from another. Dental gold from dozens of individuals commingles. The process is patient and methodical. Over a period of several months, what began as a few scattered pieces becomes a substantial weight of high-grade, recycled material. The individual stories and identities of the objects begin to merge, transforming from personal artifacts into a collective, anonymous resource. This period of accumulation is the first step in scaling up the operation from a single, personal event to an industrial-level supply. This is where a new and little-known type of business enters the story: the specialized post-cremation metal recycling company. This is a niche industry, and you will not see their logos on billboards or their advertisements on television. They operate almost entirely out of public view, working directly with funeral homes and crematoriums. Many of these companies are small, often family-owned, and have been in the business for generations, building up relationships based on trust and discretion over decades. They understand the sensitivity of their work. Their websites are typically understated and professional, speaking a language of logistics, compliance, and environmental responsibility rather than profit. They see themselves as providing a vital service, helping crematoriums deal with a byproduct of their work in a way that is both ethical and environmentally sound. The logistics of collection are a masterpiece of quiet efficiency. These recycling companies establish routes, much like a commercial waste disposal service, but on a far more specialized and discrete scale. A single truck might service hundreds of crematoriums across a multi-state region, or even an entire country. The crematorium manager knows that every 3, 6, or perhaps 12 months, depending on their volume, they can expect a scheduled pickup. They don't need to call. The recycling company has them on a regular schedule. On the appointed day, a representative from the company will arrive. The process is professional and low-key. The representative will weigh the collected bins of sorted metal on a portable, calibrated scale. A detailed receipt is generated, documenting the weight of the ferrous metals and the non-ferrous high-value alloys. The precious metals are often weighed and recorded separately due to their much higher value. There is rarely a direct financial transaction at this point. While the metals have significant intrinsic value, the business model is often not based on the crematorium selling the material directly to the recycler. Instead, the relationship is framed as a service. The recycling company is providing a no-cost solution for the disposal of these materials. In return for collecting, transporting, and processing the metals, the company will retain the bulk of the monetary value. As we will see later, a portion of the proceeds is often returned to the crematorium or donated to a designated charity on their behalf. But the primary model is one of service rather than purchase. This arrangement is beneficial for both parties. The crematorium is relieved of the logistical and ethical burden of what to do with the metals, and they fulfill what they see as an environmental responsibility. The recycling company acquires the raw feedstock for its business. After the weigh-in and the paperwork, the full bins are loaded onto the truck, and empty, clean ones are left in their place. The entire transaction might take no more than 15 or 20 minutes. The truck then moves on to the next crematorium on its route, its cargo of silent, valuable metal growing with each stop. This quiet collection process, happening simultaneously at thousands of crematoriums across the globe, forms the headwaters of a vast, invisible river of metal. Each individual contribution is small, but when aggregated, the volume becomes immense. The truck, now laden with materials from dozens of different facilities, will return to a central sorting and aggregation warehouse. Here, the metals from different crematoriums are combined into even larger containers, preparing them for the next stage of their journey. They've now been fully anonymized. A hip implant from a retired teacher in a small town is now lying next to a surgical plate from a city lawyer, indistinguishable from one another. Their personal histories have been erased, and they are now simply categorized by their alloy content: titanium, cobalt-chrome, stainless steel. They are no longer artifacts of a single life, but a bulk commodity, ready to be reintroduced into the global materials market. The quiet collection is complete, and the industrial process is about to begin. Once the metals have been collected from hundreds of crematoriums and aggregated at a regional warehouse, they enter the next phase of their journey: the invisible supply chain. This is where the story shifts from the local and personal to the national and industrial. The specialized recycling companies that orchestrate the collection act as the crucial middlemen. They don't typically have the massive industrial facilities required to melt down and purify these high-grade alloys themselves. Instead, their role is to sort, clean, and amass a sufficient quantity of material to sell as a bulk commodity to large-scale industrial refineries and smelters. At the warehouse, the collected metals undergo a more rigorous sorting process than the initial separation at the crematorium. Powerful magnets and eddy current separators are used to ensure that all ferrous materials are removed from the valuable non-ferrous stream. The alloys are also sometimes sorted by type, using X-ray fluorescence analyzers, which can identify the precise metallic composition of an object in seconds. This allows them to create highly pure, uniform batches of titanium or cobalt-chrome, which command a much higher price on the commodities market. When a sufficient tonnage has been collected, we are often talking about many tons of material at a time. It is baled into dense, compressed cubes or loaded into massive shipping containers. At this point, the material is ready for the refinery. It is sold on the global metals market, just like any other recycled commodity, such as aluminum or copper. A container of post-cremation medical alloys will be transported by truck or rail to a specialized smelter. These are vast industrial complexes, often located in major manufacturing hubs, filled with the roar of furnaces and the glow of molten metal. Here, the final transformation takes place. The cubes of compressed implants are loaded into an electric arc furnace or an induction furnace, colossal vessels that can generate temperatures far exceeding those in a crematorium, often reaching well over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 1,650 degrees Celsius. Inside the furnace, the metals finally lose their individual forms. The hip joints, the knee replacements, the surgical plates and screws all melt and merge into a single, glowing, liquid mass. This process is not just about melting, it is about purification. As the metal liquefies, any non-metallic impurities, trace organic residues, for example, are burned off and vaporized. Different metals have different densities, so fluxing agents are added to the molten bath, which bind to impurities and float to the surface as a layer of slag. This slag is skimmed off, leaving behind a pool of incredibly pure, refined liquid alloy. The molten metal is then poured into molds, where it cools and solidifies into large, uniform bars or ingots. These ingots are now a standardized industrial product. They bear no trace of their origin. They are simply certified high-grade titanium or cobalt-chrome, ready to be sold to manufacturers. The process of assaying is critical here. Samples of the molten metal are taken and analyzed in a lab to certify their exact purity and composition. This certification is what gives the ingots their value and allows them to be sold with confidence to industries that have incredibly strict material standards. It is here that we begin to see the true scale of this invisible industry. While statistics are difficult to come by due to the discrete nature of the business, industry insiders and analysts have provided estimates that are nothing short of staggering. In Europe alone, it is estimated that several hundred tons of metal are recycled from cremations each year. Globally, the figure is likely well into the thousands of tons. When you consider the high market value of medical-grade titanium and cobalt-chrome, which can be many times more valuable than common metals like steel or aluminum, the economics become clear. This is a multi-million, perhaps even a multi-hundred-million-dollar global industry, operating entirely in the background. It is a perfect example of a circular economy, but one that is powered by one of the most linear and final processes of all, the end of human life. It leverages the byproducts of our most sacred rituals and reintegrates them into the fabric of our most advanced technologies. The journey is a marvel of reverse logistics. It begins with a single, deeply personal object, handled with care by a crematorium operator. It is then aggregated with hundreds of similar objects, losing its individuality to become part of a local collection. This collection is then transported and merged with thousands of others at a regional hub, becoming a classified commodity. Finally, it is shipped to a refinery, where intense heat erases its past and reforges it into a pure, raw material. The supply chain is invisible to us because its touch points are in places we rarely see. The utility room of a crematorium, an unmarked logistics warehouse, the fiery heart of an industrial smelter. The families who consented to the recycling of non-organic materials have no idea of this complex, globe-spanning journey. They are grieving, focused on memory and loss. Meanwhile, unnoticed and unremarked upon, a part of their loved one's physical story is being methodically and efficiently prepared for a surprising and productive second life. The ingots of pure, recycled metal, now cool and stacked on pallets, are ready for the final leg of their journey, waiting for the purchase order that will send them back out into the world of manufacturing. Once the post-cremation metals have been melted, purified, and cast into standardized ingots, their journey takes a final, remarkable turn. They are no longer defined by their past as medical implants, but by their future as high-performance raw materials. These ingots of certified aerospace-grade titanium and cobalt-chrome are sold on the global commodities market to a surprisingly diverse range of industries. The very same qualities that made them ideal for use inside the human body, their immense strength, light weight, and incredible resistance to corrosion and stress, make them highly sought after for some of the most demanding applications in modern engineering. A significant portion of this recycled metal finds its way into the automotive and aeronautical sectors. Consider the modern airplane. It is a machine operating at the very limits of material science. Every component, from the massive turbine blades in the jet engines to the smallest structural fasteners in the fuselage, must be both incredibly strong and as light as possible. Titanium alloys are a critical ingredient in achieving this. They are used in engine components that must withstand extreme temperatures and pressures, in landing gear that must absorb immense impact forces, and in the airframe itself to provide strength without adding unnecessary weight. There is a very real and direct link. The titanium from a hip implant that allowed a person to walk without pain could, after this long journey of reclamation and renewal, become part of a jet engine turbine, spinning at 13,000 revolutions per minute, 30,000 feet in the air. The metal service, in a way, continues. It has graduated from supporting a single human body to supporting a machine that carries hundreds of them through the sky. Similarly, in the high-performance automotive industry, these metals are prized. Luxury sports cars and racing vehicles use titanium and cobalt-chrome alloys in engine parts like valves and connecting rods, in suspension systems, and in exhaust components. The goal is the same: to reduce weight, increase strength, and improve performance. A small amount of recycled medical-grade alloy might end up in a Formula One car, contributing to its speed and resilience on the track. It's a strange and poetic transformation from the slow, steady work of supporting a human joint to the high-octane, adrenaline-fueled world of motorsport. The shipbuilding industry also uses these corrosion-resistant alloys, particularly for naval vessels and submarines, where components are constantly exposed to the harsh, corrosive effects of salt water. A propeller, a drive shaft, or a hull component on a ship could contain metal that once served a completely different purpose inside a human being. This is a circular economy of mortality in its most tangible form. It's a closed loop that most of us never see. We think of recycling in terms of plastic bottles and cardboard boxes, but this is something far more profound. It is the literal repurposing of the parts that once constituted us. It demonstrates that even in death, the materials that supported our lives can be rewoven into the technological fabric of the world we leave behind. The dead, in a very real material sense, are contributing to the infrastructure of the living. They are in the planes we fly, the cars we drive, and the ships that cross our oceans. This is not a metaphor. It is a statement of industrial fact. This entire system operates because of simple market economics. It is often more energy efficient and cost-effective to recycle high-grade alloys like titanium than it is to mine and refine them from virgin ore. Mining titanium is an incredibly energy-intensive process. Recycling it uses a fraction of that energy, making it an environmentally and economically attractive option for manufacturers. The market value of these metals, like any commodity, fluctuates based on global supply and demand. The price of titanium can be influenced by demand from major aircraft manufacturers like Boeing and Airbus, while the price of cobalt can be affected by its use in batteries for electric vehicles. The post-cremation recycling industry is a small but steady contributor to this global supply. It is a reliable stream of high-quality material that helps to feed the world's advanced manufacturing appetite. The recycling companies that sit in the middle of this supply chain are constantly monitoring these market prices, timing their sales of refined ingots to maximize their return. Their business is not just about logistics, it's about playing the commodities market. They are transforming something that society largely considers to be medical waste, or at best a sentimental artifact, into a valuable, tradable asset. This economic engine is what powers the entire invisible journey, from the crematorium sorting tray to the factory floor. It ensures that these durable, valuable materials are not lost to a landfill, but are instead given a new purpose, a second life of service in a completely different context. And so, the cycle is complete. A piece of metal, once intimately part of a human story, is now an anonymous component in a larger technological one, its origins completely erased, its utility completely renewed. While the industrial journey of titanium and cobalt-chrome is a story of high-tech reincarnation, there is another, smaller, but far more lucrative stream of metal that follows a different path. This is the stream of precious metals, the gold, palladium, platinum, and silver found primarily in dental work. A single gold crown or filling may seem insignificant, but when aggregated from hundreds or thousands of individuals, it represents a substantial amount of wealth. At the crematorium, these metals are collected in their own separate, secure container. Unlike a bulky hip implant, this collection is small, dense, and incredibly valuable by weight. It consists of small, melted, and often misshapen nuggets, as the relatively low melting point of gold causes it to liquefy and fuse with other materials during the cremation process. This precious metal collection is not sold to the same industrial refiners that handle the medical alloys. Instead, it is sent to specialized precious metal refineries, the same kind of facilities that process scrap jewelry, dental waste from dentists' offices, and industrial catalysts. These refineries are experts in the complex art of assaying and separating different precious metals from one another. The logistics are handled with a much higher level of security. The collected material might be shipped via an armored courier, and its chain of custody is meticulously tracked. Upon arrival at the refinery, the first step is to determine exactly what is in the mixed metal nuggets. A sample is taken and subjected to a rigorous analysis, often using a process called a fire assay, which is the gold standard, pun intended, for determining the precise purity of a gold-bearing sample. This tells the refiner the exact percentage of gold, platinum, palladium, and silver in the batch. Once the composition is known, the refining process begins. This is a highly technical chemical process. The metal nuggets are dissolved in a powerful mixture of acids, such as aqua regia, a mixture of nitric acid and hydrochloric acid, which can dissolve even noble metals like gold and platinum. Once the metals are in a liquid solution, they can be separated from each other through selective precipitation. By carefully changing the chemical conditions of the solution, each metal can be made to fall out of the liquid as a solid, pure substance. For example, a specific chemical agent is added that will only react with gold, causing pure 24-karat gold to precipitate out as a fine powder or sludge. This process is repeated for each of the valuable metals in the batch, until all that is left is a collection of separate, highly pure precious metals. This pure gold powder is then melted down and cast into small, certified bars or grains. It has been fully restored to its elemental form, ready to re-enter the global precious metals market. The second life of this gold is often more direct and personal than that of the industrial alloys. While some of it might be used in high-end electronics or medicals applications, a significant portion finds its way back into the jewelry market. The pure gold is sold to jewelry manufacturers, who will alloy it with other metals to create the familiar 18-karat or 14-karat gold used in rings, necklaces, and watches. It is entirely possible that the gold from a grandparent's dental crown could end up in a wedding band worn by a young couple today. The material, once a symbol of repair and longevity in one person's life, is transformed into a symbol of love and commitment in another's. Like the industrial metals, its origins are completely erased. There is no way to distinguish recycled cremation gold from newly mined gold. It is simply gold, a fundamental element ready for a new story. This highly lucrative and efficient recycling stream brings us to the heart of the moral and ethical debate surrounding post-cremation metals. Who has the rightful claim to this monetary value? The question is far from simple. Let's consider the stakeholders. First, there is the family of the deceased. The gold crown was paid for by their loved one or their insurance. It was, legally and practically, their personal property. Does the family's ownership of that property cease at the moment of death or at the moment of cremation? Does the family have a right to the monetary value of that reclaimed gold? Most families are never even presented with this question, as they are unaware that the gold is recovered at all. The cremation authorization form they sign usually contains a clause that gives the crematorium permission to recycle any remaining metals. But the financial implications are rarely, if ever, spelled out. Then there is the crematorium. They are performing the work of carefully recovering, sorting, and storing these materials. They are providing a space and a service. They could argue that the value of the recovered metals is a form of compensation for this additional labor, or that it helps to offset their operational costs, thereby keeping the price of cremation lower for all families. They might also see it as an environmental service they are providing, and any revenue is simply a byproduct of acting responsibly. Finally, there is the recycling company. They are investing in the logistics, the transportation, the specialized equipment, and the industrial relationships required to make this entire process happen. They are taking on the market risk, buying a raw material and hoping to sell it for a profit after a complex and expensive refining process. They would argue that they are creating value where there was none, turning a forgotten byproduct into a usable commodity. There is no easy answer, and practices vary wildly depending on local laws, cultural norms, and the policies of individual companies. Some argue that any and all value should be returned to the estate of the deceased. Others believe a system where the value is used to fund charitable causes is the most ethical solution. And many in the industry maintain that the current model, where the value is absorbed by the crematoriums and recyclers as part of their business operations, is the most efficient and practical approach, preventing administrative nightmares and potential disputes with thousands of families over what are often very small individual sums of money. This question of gold, far more than that of industrial titanium, forces us to confront the uncomfortable intersection of grief and commerce, memory and material value. It is a quiet debate, happening largely behind the scenes, but it speaks volumes about how we, as a society, decide what is sacred and what is salvage when a life comes to an end. The entire multi-million-dollar industry of post-cremation metal recycling hinges on a single, crucial moment of consent. This moment doesn't happen in a boardroom or at a commodities exchange. It happens quietly, in a funeral home, at a time of profound grief and emotional vulnerability. It is embedded within the pages of the cremation authorization form, a legal document that the next of kin must sign before the process can begin. This form is a lengthy, detailed document covering everything from the positive identification of the deceased to the final disposition of the cremated remains. And somewhere within its many clauses, there is typically a section dealing with what the form might call personal effects, medical implants, or non-organic materials. The wording of this clause is where the consent is both obtained and often obscured. It is rarely explicit. You will almost never see a sentence that says, "We will recover and sell the valuable metals from your loved one's body for a profit." Instead, the language is typically passive, clinical, and framed as a practical necessity. A common phrasing might be something like, "The undersigned authorizes the crematory to remove and dispose of any non-human materials remaining after the cremation process in a responsible and environmentally friendly manner." Another variation might state that such materials will be recycled whenever possible, or disposed of at the discretion of the crematory. By signing this, the family is, in legal terms, relinquishing any claim to these materials and giving the crematorium full authority to decide their fate. At the moment of signing, the family is understandably not focused on the fine print regarding surgical steel or dental gold. They are grappling with loss, making a series of difficult and painful decisions under immense emotional pressure. The funeral director guides them through the paperwork, focusing on the most critical choices: the type of service, the selection of an urn, the final resting place of the remains. The clause about non-organic materials is usually passed over with a brief, and this just gives us permission to handle any medical implants. It's a statement that is true, but incomplete. The family, trusting the professional, signs the form. In that moment of quiet grief, with the stroke of a pen, the legal transfer of ownership for potentially thousands of dollars worth of high-grade metal is completed. This is not to suggest any malicious intent on the part of the funeral director or the industry. From their perspective, this is a standard, necessary procedure. Explaining the complex economics of metal recycling to a grieving family would be seen as inappropriate, insensitive, and needlessly distressing. It would be a jarring intrusion of commerce into a sacred moment. The industry's preference for discretion and silence is, in many ways, born from a desire to shield families from what could be perceived as a crude and unsettling reality. The result, however, is a widespread lack of public awareness. The vast majority of people, even those who've arranged cremations for loved ones, have no idea this process occurs. The silence is systemic. Crematoriums and recycling companies do not advertise this aspect of their business. It is a behind-the-scenes operational detail, not a public-facing service. This quietness is compounded by the fact that there is very little regulation governing this specific area. The laws and regulations surrounding the funeral industry are primarily focused on consumer protection, health and safety standards, and ensuring the dignified treatment of the deceased. The disposition of post-cremation byproducts is often left to industry best practices and the policies of individual businesses. When we look at the legal landscape internationally, we see a patchwork of different approaches. In the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, for example, the practice of recycling medical implants is well established and often regulated by industry associations. There are clear schemes in place where the proceeds from the recycled metals are consistently donated to charity. This creates a transparent and socially accepted framework for the practice. In the United States, the situation is far more fragmented. Regulation happens at the state level, and most states have little to no specific legislation on the matter. This leaves the decision entirely up to the crematorium. They can choose to work with a recycler who donates to charity, or one who doesn't. They can choose to disclose this practice to families, or they can rely on the vague wording of the authorization form. This lack of a unified legal or regulatory framework means that the process can vary significantly from one town to the next, from one funeral home to another. This combination of vaguely worded consent forms, the industry's culture of discretion, and a lack of specific regulation creates a system that functions smoothly and efficiently, but operates in a perpetual state of ethical ambiguity. It, too, relies on the public not asking a question that they don't even know exists. It's a silence of consent, a quiet agreement to let the professionals handle the details, however unsettling those details might be if they were brought into the full light of day. The system works because it is invisible, and it remains invisible because, for the most part, everyone involved, from the grieving family to the funeral director to the recycler, has a vested interest in keeping it that way. It is a fragile piece, built on a foundation of unspoken truths and the quiet, practical necessity of dealing with the durable, valuable things we leave behind inside us. Let us now shift our perspective to the very people at the heart of this story, yet who remain almost entirely outside of its machinations, the grieving families. For them, the days and weeks surrounding a death are a blur of memories, logistics, and raw emotion. Their focus is on the intangible, on the life that was lived, the love that was shared, and the immense void that has been left behind. The physical reality of the body is often something they entrust to professionals, a necessary but painful part of the process that they would rather not dwell on. They choose an urn, they plan a service, and they wait for the return of the ashes, a soft, sterile powder that symbolizes their loved one, now freed from physical form. The idea that a separate industrial process is happening in parallel, a process of sorting, weighing, and valuing the metallic components of that same body, is a concept so foreign to their state of mind that it rarely, if ever, occurs to them. They are in the world of the sacred, of memory and spirit. The recycling industry is in the world of the profane, of material and commerce. The two realities coexist in the same space and time, but they do not touch. The family's unasked question is not a failure of curiosity. It is a natural consequence of grief. Grief narrows our focus to what is most essential: love, loss, and connection. A discussion about the scrap value of a titanium hip joint falls far outside that essential frame. But what if the question were asked? What if a funeral director, in a moment of radical transparency, sat down with the family and explained the entire process? After the cremation, they might say, "We will recover your mother's 2 knee replacements and the gold from her dental fillings. These materials have a significant monetary value. We work with a company that will recycle them. What would you like us to do?" This simple, direct question opens a Pandora's box of complex emotional and ethical dilemmas for the family. Suddenly, they are forced to confront a reality they were shielded from, and there is no single, easy response. One family might be utterly appalled. The idea of their loved one's body being parted out for profit, no matter how responsibly, could feel like a profound violation, a desecration of a sacred memory. For them, these metal parts are not commodities. They are intrinsically linked to the person they loved. The knee joints that carried their mother through her garden are not just cobalt-chrome. They are a part of her. They might ask, "Can we have them back?" this presents a new set of challenges. What would they do with a pair of sterilized, fire-scarred knee implants? Keep them on the mantelpiece next to the urn? Bury them? The objects are too personal to be discarded, yet too strange and clinical to be integrated into the normal rituals of remembrance. For this family, ignorance would have been bliss. The knowledge of the process itself becomes a new source of pain. Another family might have a more pragmatic reaction. They might be surprised, but not necessarily upset. Their response could be, well, it seems wasteful to just throw them away. If they can be put to good use, that's what he would have wanted. This practical mindset sees the logic in the circular economy. The person is gone. Their spirit and memory are what matter. The body and its associated hardware are just a vessel that has served its purpose. For this family, the follow-up question would likely be about the money. If the gold is valuable, does that money come to us? His estate could use it. This introduces the complex logistics of assaying and valuing the metals from a single individual and cutting a check for what might be a relatively small amount. It turns a moment of grief into a financial transaction, which could feel just as unsettling in its own way as the idea of desecration. A third family might find a different kind of meaning in the process. They might be comforted by the idea of this quiet continuity. The thought that the titanium that gave their father the ability to walk could go on to become part of an airplane, continuing a journey of service and support, might be a beautiful and poetic notion. For them, the recycling is not a violation, but a form of transformation, a way for a part of their loved one to be rewoven into the fabric of the world in a useful, tangible way. They might be most interested in the charitable donation model, saying, "We don't want the money, but if it can be donated to the hospice that took such good care of her, that would be a wonderful tribute." This spectrum of potential reactions highlights the deep emotional conflict at the core of this issue. It is a clash between the sacred memory of a person and the profane value of their material components. There is no right or wrong answer, because the question itself forces us to draw a line between the person and their parts, a line that we are not accustomed to thinking about. We see the body as an integrated whole, and the idea of disaggregating it into valuable and non-valuable components feels deeply uncomfortable. The industry's silence, therefore, can be seen as a kind of passive empathy, a recognition that this is a conversation most families are not equipped to have and do not want to have in their moment of loss. And so, the question remains unasked, and the family is left with their memories and an urn of ashes, unaware of the final, secret journey that has already begun. Faced with the ethical ambiguity of profiting from the dead, the post-cremation recycling industry has widely adopted a practice that serves as both a moral compass and a shrewd business strategy: charitable giving. A significant portion of the revenue generated from the sale of these reclaimed metals is not kept by the crematoriums or even the recycling companies themselves, but is instead donated to a wide array of charities and community projects. This practice reframes the entire enterprise, shifting it from a purely commercial venture into a form of social enterprise, a quiet engine for philanthropy fueled by the byproducts of our final goodbyes. The model is often quite formal. In many countries, especially in Europe, national schemes have been established to oversee this process. A central, non-profit organization will contract with a recycling company to manage the collection and processing of all the metals from crematoriums across the country. The net proceeds are then pooled into a charitable fund, and every year, crematoriums that participate in the scheme are invited to nominate local charities to receive a donation. This system is elegant in its simplicity and its impact. It allows the value generated in a local community to be returned to that same community. A crematorium in a small town can nominate the local hospice that cared for many of the individuals whose implants are now being recycled. They can support a nearby children's hospital, a grief counseling service, or a community garden project. The announcements of these donations are often the only time this hidden industry ever breaks the surface of public awareness. You might see a small article in a local newspaper. Local crematorium donates $5,000 to St. Jude's Hospice, with a photograph of the crematorium manager presenting a check. The article will often mention that the funds were raised through a nationwide metals recycling program, a gentle, unobtrusive phrase that satisfies curiosity without delving into the specifics. This practice creates a virtuous cycle. The charities receive much-needed funding. The crematorium is seen as a positive, contributing member of its community, and the recycling company operates under a clear, ethically sound mandate. But let's look at this practice with a more critical eye. Is it purely an act of altruism, or is it also a calculated business decision? The answer, most likely, is that it is both. From a genuine philanthropic perspective, it is a way for an industry that deals constantly with death and grief to create a legacy of life and healing. It provides a sense of meaning and purpose to what could otherwise be a grim and purely mechanical task. Many people working in this field take immense pride in the charitable contributions they are able to facilitate. They see the direct, positive impact in their communities and feel they are honoring the dead by using their final material legacy to help the living. They are transforming a potential source of ethical conflict into a source of undisputed social good. From a strategic business perspective, however, the charitable model is also a brilliant form of risk management. It preemptively answers the difficult questions about who should profit from these materials. By voluntarily redirecting the profits to charity, the industry neutralizes potential criticism and avoids public relations disasters. If a journalist or a grieving family were to question the practice, the industry has a powerful and emotionally resonant response. The money doesn't go to us. It goes to support hospice care. This is an almost unassailable ethical position. It insulates the industry from accusations of profiting from the dead and allows them to continue their work with a social license to operate. It is a way to solve the moral dilemma before it can ever truly become a public controversy. Furthermore, it strengthens the relationship between the crematoriums and the recycling companies. The crematoriums feel good about participating in a program that benefits their local community, making them loyal partners. The scale of these donations is not trivial. In the United Kingdom, for instance, the scheme run by the Institute of Cemetery and Crematorium Management has raised tens of millions of pounds for charity since its inception. This is money that has funded new hospital wings, purchased specialized medical equipment, supported bereavement services for children, and helped keep local hospices running. The list of beneficiaries is long and varied. The death metal industry, as it is sometimes grimly nicknamed, has become a silent, steady, and significant source of funding for the very sectors of society that care for the living and the dying. The hip joint that allowed one person to live their final years with dignity might, through this charitable transformation, fund the care that allows another person to die with that same dignity. So, is it a genuine act of philanthropy or a clever business strategy? The truth is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. It is a system where ethical behavior and good business have become perfectly aligned. The desire to do the right thing has created a model that is also stable, sustainable, and publicly defensible. It allows an industry that operates in the shadows to cast a ray of light, turning the final, inert, and forgotten parts of us into a source of continuing care and compassion in the world. It is a quiet, pragmatic, and remarkably effective solution to a problem that most people don't even know exists. It ensures that the last hidden value of a life is not lost, but is instead transformed into a final, anonymous gift. The modern industrial process of recycling medical implants is a product of a very specific cultural and technological context. It assumes a view of the body as a machine that can be repaired with replaceable parts, and it assumes a secular, pragmatic approach to what is left behind after death. But this is far from a universal perspective. If we broaden our view, we find that different cultures and religions have profoundly different ideas about the body, its attachments, and what should happen to them after life ends. These views can create a fascinating tension with the quiet efficiency of the recycling industry. In many traditional belief systems, the body is seen as a sacred and indivisible whole, which must be returned to the earth or the elements intact. The idea of removing parts from it, either before or after death, can be deeply problematic. For example, in Orthodox Judaism, the principle of nivel hamet, or disgracing the dead, is a serious prohibition. The body is considered to be created in the image of God and must be treated with the utmost respect. This includes ensuring that all of its parts, including blood and limbs, are buried together. Cremation itself is forbidden in traditional Judaism for this very reason. While a person is alive, a medical implant is, of course, permitted as a life-saving necessity. But after death, the ideal would be for the body to be buried whole, implant included, allowing it to slowly return to the earth as a complete entity. The idea of post-cremation recovery and recycling would be entirely alien to this worldview. Similarly, in Islam, the body is held in great reverence. It is to be washed, shrouded, and buried as quickly as possible, always facing Mecca. Cremation is strictly forbidden, haram. The integrity of the body is paramount, and the thought of it being subjected to an industrial process to recover metal parts would be considered a desecration. The body is an amanah, a sacred trust from Allah, and it must be returned in a state of wholeness and respect. For both of these Abrahamic faiths, the fundamental conflict is with the act of cremation itself, making the question of recycling a secondary and largely moot point. However, it highlights a worldview where the body's physical integrity after death is of profound spiritual importance. In Eastern traditions, the perspectives can be more varied. In Hinduism, cremation, antieshti, is the traditional and preferred method of disposition. It is seen as a ritual of release, a way to sever the soul's ties to the physical body and aid its journey toward reincarnation or liberation, moksha. The fire is a purifying agent, and the destruction of the body is a key part of the process. In this context, the idea of recovering metal implants might not carry the same sense of desecration. The focus is on the soul's journey, not the fate of the physical remnants. However, historical practices involved returning all the ashes and bone fragments to a sacred river, like the Ganges. The idea of sifting through them to find valuable materials for commercial purposes might still conflict with the spiritual solemnity of the ritual, which emphasizes renunciation of worldly attachments. Buddhism, too, has a range of views. Cremation is common, and the Buddha himself was cremated. The core teaching of Buddhism is impermanence, anicca, and non-attachment, nekkhamma. The body is seen as a temporary vessel, and clinging to it or its parts after death would be seen as a form of attachment that hinders spiritual progress. From a purely philosophical standpoint, a Buddhist might see the recycling of implants as a perfect illustration of impermanence and interconnectedness, a material form changing and being repurposed for a new function. There would likely be little theological objection to the practice itself. However, as in many cultures, the act is often imbued with deep family-based rituals, and the idea of a commercial transaction intruding on this final moment of letting go could be seen as inappropriate. This contrast between modern industrial practices and historical or religious traditions is striking. For much of human history, it was common practice to bury the dead with their most valued possessions. Think of the ancient Egyptians burying pharaohs with unimaginable treasures to accompany them into the afterlife, or the Vikings being sent off in ships filled with their weapons, tools, and even sacrificed animals. These practices were rooted in a belief that these objects were necessary or useful for the journey ahead, or that they were an inseparable part of the deceased's identity and status. In this worldview, leaving a person with their earthly attachments was a sign of honor and respect. Our modern practice of recycling implants is, in a way, the precise opposite. It is the systematic unburying of a person's most durable and, in some cases, valuable attachments. We are carefully separating the person from their parts and reintegrating those parts back into the world of the living. This reflects a profound cultural shift from a belief in a physical afterlife that requires material goods to a more secular, scientific, and ecological understanding of the body as a collection of chemical and material components that can be broken down and repurposed. We have, in essence, replaced a spiritual form of recycling, equipping a soul for its next journey, with a purely material one. As we look toward the future, the quiet, hidden world of post-mortem metal recycling is poised for significant change, driven by evolving technologies, shifting cultural attitudes toward death, and a growing demand for greater transparency and sustainability in the funeral industry. The very methods by which we return the body to its elemental state are beginning to diversify, and these new technologies will fundamentally alter the process of metal recovery. The most prominent of these emerging technologies is alkaline hydrolysis, also known as water cremation, aquamation, or resumation. Alkaline hydrolysis is a process that uses a heated solution of water and an alkaline chemical, like potassium hydroxide, to gently break down the body's organic tissues over a period of several hours, mimicking the natural process of decomposition, but accelerating it dramatically. The process takes place in a pressurized stainless steel vessel and uses a fraction of the energy of flame-based cremation, producing no airborne emissions. At the end of the cycle, what remains is a sterile, syrupy liquid containing the body's chemical components, which can be used as a nutrient-rich fertilizer, and the same collection of bone fragments and non-organic materials as in flame cremation. These bone fragments are then processed into ashes in much the same way. From the perspective of metal recovery, alkaline hydrolysis is a game changer because it is a gentle, water-based process that takes place at a much lower temperature, around 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 degrees Celsius. The medical implants and dental work are left perfectly intact and pristine. Gold crowns emerge not as melted nuggets, but as recognizable dental hardware. Surgical implants are not just structurally sound. They are often so clean, they look almost new. This makes the process of sorting and identifying them significantly easier and more efficient. Furthermore, delicate items that would have been destroyed or damaged by fire, such as certain types of polymers or even silicone implants, can survive the process. This will create new streams of materials for recycling and disposal that the industry hasn't had to consider before. As alkaline hydrolysis becomes more widely accepted and legally available, it will likely lead to a higher yield and higher quality of recovered metals, making the entire recycling supply chain even more efficient. Alongside technological change, there is a growing societal demand for greater transparency in all industries, and the funeral sector is no exception. The idea of a black box process, where families are simply asked to trust that things are being handled correctly, is becoming less acceptable. We can see a future where technologies like blockchain could be used to create an immutable, transparent record of these materials. Imagine a system where a recovered hip implant is assigned a unique digital token at the crematorium. That token could then be used to track the implant as it moves through the supply chain, to the recycler, to the smelter, and even to its final destination in a new product. A family could, if they chose, have access to this digital ledger. They could see that the proceeds from their loved one's implants were donated to a specific charity and receive a digital certificate confirming the donation. This would replace the current system of vague consent and opaque processes with one of radical transparency and verifiable accountability. While the implementation of such a system is still a long way off, it points to a future where consent is more informed and the journey of these materials is no longer a secret. This push for transparency is part of a much larger conversation happening around sustainable death care. A new generation is beginning to plan for their end-of-life choices with the same environmental and ethical considerations they apply to their lives. They are asking questions about the carbon footprint of cremation, the use of toxic embalming fluids, and the sustainability of hardwoods for caskets. Natural burials, where the body is placed in a simple shroud and allowed to decompose naturally, are gaining popularity. Alkaline hydrolysis is being promoted as a greener alternative to flame cremation. Within this movement, the recycling of medical implants is seen as a profoundly positive and logical step. It is the ultimate example of waste not, want not. It fits perfectly into a circular economy mindset, where every material is seen as a resource to be kept in circulation for as long as possible. As this sustainable death care movement grows, the practice of metal recycling is likely to come out of the shadows. Instead of being a hidden, vaguely worded clause on a form, it could become a celebrated feature, a key selling point for environmentally conscious consumers. Funeral homes of the future might actively advertise their 100% metal recycling and charitable donation program as a mark of their commitment to sustainability and ethical practice. The future, therefore, is likely to be one where this process is not only technologically more efficient, but also culturally more open and integrated into a broader philosophy of how to leave the world a little better than we found it. We have followed a quiet, hidden current that flows just beneath the surface of our most profound rituals of grief. It is a journey that begins with a single, intimate object, a hip joint that carried a grandfather, a gold crown that witnessed 1,000 family dinners, and ends as an anonymous industrial ingot, its personal history erased by fire and fusion. We have seen how this object is separated, sorted, collected, transported, melted, and ultimately reborn as a component in the complex machinery of our modern world. It is a story of transformation, a secular miracle of metallurgy and logistics that turns the sacred into the serviceable, the artifact of a single life into the raw material for many. In the end, we return to the central question we began with: what happens to these parts of us, and what does it mean? The answer, we have found, is both astonishingly practical and deeply philosophical. Practically, these metals go back to work. They continue their function of providing strength, support, and resilience, but on a different scale. They are woven back into the fabric of the living world in the most literal sense, becoming part of the infrastructure that carries us, protects us, and connects us. The dead, through this process, become silent, unseen collaborators in the continuation of our collective life. Their strength is added to ours. This is a form of immortality that is not spiritual or genetic, but material. It is a quiet, industrial continuity that connects generations in a way we never see. But the more profound answer lies in what this process reveals about our relationship with the human body, with memory, and with the material world itself. We are, it seems, more than just our stories and our DNA. We are also archives of the materials of our time. Our bodies have become repositories of high-grade alloys and precious metals, a testament to a civilization that has learned to mend and augment its own biology. A century ago, this entire industry could not have existed because the materials were not yet inside of us. We have, in a single century, transformed the very composition of our final remains. This recycling process forces us to confront the boundary between a person and their possessions, a boundary that becomes blurred when the possession is screwed to a bone or cemented to a tooth. Is a hip implant part of us, or is it something we own? The industry, by necessity, treats it as the latter, a piece of property to be disposed of. Yet, for the family, the feeling is often closer to the former. This ambiguity is the source of all the ethical tension that surrounds the practice. And perhaps there is no single answer. Perhaps these objects exist in a liminal state, simultaneously a part of a person's sacred memory and a part of the world's profane material resources. The journey of these metals also holds up a mirror to our values. We see our pragmatism in the efficiency of the supply chain, our compassion in the charitable donations it funds, our discomfort in the silence that surrounds it, and our ingenuity in the technologies that make it all possible. The entire system is a complex, unwritten social contract, a series of quiet compromises between reverence and resourcefulness. We have collectively, if unconsciously, decided that it is better to reuse these valuable materials than to discard them. And we have found a way to do so that, for the most part, brings comfort to the living without disrespecting the dead. It is a solution that is both imperfect and elegant, a testament to our species' ability to create meaning and order in the face of life's most inevitable and chaotic conclusion. And so, the next time you are in an airplane, taxiing down a runway, you might find yourself thinking about this hidden cycle. You might wonder about the alloy in the turbine blades, about its long and silent journey from the quiet of a crematorium to the roaring heart of a jet engine. It is not a morbid thought. It is a contemplative one. It is a recognition that we are all, in the end, part of a larger material story. The elements that compose us were forged in distant stars, and the elements we add to ourselves may one day take to the skies. Our bodies are temporary archives, and when we are gone, our stories are told not only in the memories of those who loved us, but also in the silent, enduring objects we carried within us, now returned to the great, flowing river of the world.